Welcome to week 3 of the NFL. That's right, week 2 was an interesting week for sure. I'm sure many of you out there have struggled with making your pick'ems because there were many weird upsets. I mean, in the first set of games, the noon games, there were 6 underdogs that won straight up. I mean, that's kind of unheard of today, especially watching the Saints whip the out of the Dallas Cowboys, which is great to see. And hopefully more to come for the Saints and more beatings to come for the Dallas Cowboys. But let me know what you think down below. And as always, we'll go through every game, top to bottom, give you my score, give you what I think is going to happen, and then let me know what you think. Let's start out with our first game of the week. New England versus the Jets in New York. This is going to be an interesting game. Now, the Patriots have played fairly well the past 2 weeks. I mean, the refs did admit during the noon games, or at least there was a source that the Cincinnati Bengals should have gotten a touchdown with Mike Gesicki late in that game that would have ended the Patriots' day, and the Patriots would be 0-2. But I mean, their defense hasn't played up to snuff, and their offense has been fine. But let's be honest, the Patriots will not fully succeed until they get rid of Jacoby Brissett and put in Drake May. It is best for your young quarterback to learn on the job, especially when he's the better quarterback. Drake May is better than Jacoby Brissett. We know that for a fact. Stop teasing us by stringing us along and having Jacoby Brissett, who's a fine quarterback. I mean, he's above average, which is fine, but he's still nowhere near what Drake May could be. And until they can really succeed, or Drake May is out there, they can't really succeed and move on with their future. But I think Rodgers is probably going to get better as the season goes along. I still don't think you're going to ever see MVP Rodgers ever again, but we'll still see a suitable Rodgers. I mean, they have 2 decent running backs. Brees Hall hasn't had the best season start, but he scored a couple of TDs. Braylon Allen had 2 touchdowns last week. Garrett Wilson's going to have to get after Schneider. He has not been the same Garrett Wilson we've known the past couple of years. Their defense has been pretty solid, although they lost a big piece in Jermaine Johnson for the rest of the year, so that sucks, especially for his development. But I think, all in all, the Jets defense will carry them through, and although the Patriots defense hasn't thrived, I think Rodgers will still be able to get enough. It's in New York. It's on a Thursday. I think the Jets probably win this game. Probably going to be relatively close, maybe 20-17. But when it's all said and done, I just think the Jets are a better team. And although the Patriots shocked everybody in the first week with the win, this probably not going to happen again this week. Although, if they do win, wouldn't be shocked in the least. Next, we have the Giants at Cleveland. Now again, 2 very interesting teams. Well, not really. The Giants aren't that interesting, but Malik Neighbors showed off why he was drafted in the top part of the league. But it's amazing. They scored 3 touchdowns. They didn't give up any touchdowns to the opposite team, and they still lost. This is only the second time in NFL history that such a thing happened. It's amazing how they shot themselves in the foot on the way to a loss. Now, it wasn't Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors was awesome in showing he could have a real good superstar-like career if only he had a really good quarterback. Now, Daniel Jones has been fine for the most part of the first couple of weeks, but I guess at least scoring-wise, he's been okay, but it's just he's not going to get the job done. It's not. This is going to be a washout year for the Giants. They're not going to win much. They're probably looking at a top 5 pick next year. Hopefully, their coach can survive. Please, I hope he can. He's a good coach. He's just got saddled with one of the worst quarterbacks we've seen in a long time. But when it's all said and done, the offense has been moving decently for the Giants for the most part, at least last week. And Cleveland has been very up and down. Their defense has been pretty solid for the most part, but Deshaun Watson's probably going to find himself out of Cleveland eventually. Now, I probably think the Cleveland will probably just maybe eat the contract in the future, even though it seems really, really hard to imagine doing so. But Deshaun Watson just that bad. He really is. And to be honest, Jameis Winston isn't much better. But that defense should be plenty for the Browns to win. I like the Browns to win in the end. Let's say 23-14, something like that. Now, the offense hasn't been great for the Browns, but I think they should be able to score enough against the Giants, because the Giants, there's just not a lot of good to speak of. Sure, Dexter Lawrence is there on defense, but there's only so much a great interior defensive lineman can really do. I mean, especially when the offense is as putrid as the Giants has been. Although last week it was pretty solid against a really bad Washington defense. So, in the end, the Cleveland Browns win 23-17. And frankly, I really don't see any reason for the Giants to win. I really don't, barring some weird coincidence. Next, Chicago versus Indy. Another interesting game. Indy is coming in 0-2. Anthony Richardson has not been great. Their defense has been leaking like a sieve. Now, the Bears, on the other hand, offense has been anything but good. Very slow, not very efficient. The running game has just been non-existent. The offensive line has not been able to give any push whatsoever. And also, they've been giving up penalties left and right. Holding, false start, illegal motion, illegal formation. Everything and more has been done by the Bears offensive line this year. I mean, they've been getting called for everything. I mean, there were like 21 called penalties in the game against Houston. Now, I'm sure they're split somewhat evenly between both teams, but still, that still leaves a large portion of penalties for the Bears that need to be cleaned up ASAP. Now, Caleb Williams, this is the week. If you're going to write something on the calendar for Caleb Williams to have a Caleb Williams type game from when he was in college, this is the week. The Colts have no rush defense whatsoever. They have no push. They cannot stop anybody. I mean, the past 2 weeks, they gave him like 163 yards to Joe Mixon week 1. They gave up 153 yards to Josh Jacobs last week, and over 250 overall rushing yards to the Green Bay Packers as a whole. And they stacked the box, and they still gave up so many rushing yards, and their offense has not been great. Now, Jonathan Taylor has been pretty solid for the most part, and the offensive line has had his moments, and Alec Pierce looks like to be a great deep threat for the future, and Michael Pittman is still Michael Pittman, but Anthony Richardson has not been good. He just has not. He hasn't been efficient. He made some really good throws against Houston, but he only completed 9 passes. And sure, that was almost enough to win, but you got to do better, especially against the Bears defense that has been really good. Like typical Bears teams, their offense isn't great, but their defense is fucking great. They need a big win this week. And so, I'm going to pick the Bears to win. I'm going to pick 24-17. Because I still think Jonathan Taylor will be able to get some yards and maybe a touchdown for the Indy. And I think Anthony Richardson should have a better or somewhat better game than last week. But, man, Caleb Williams needs to shine out this week. He needs the ball. Otherwise, if the Bears suffer another loss and Caleb Williams is still the Caleb Williams we've seen the first 2 games, then you start to question a little bit. You don't put him out to pasture just like that, but you start to wonder, did we make the wrong pick? Are we going to need to change coaches at the end of the year? Are we going to have to make massive changes that might fuck up his development? These are the questions that will need to be answered should the Bears lose again, but I think they'll win. But if they lose, honest questions will have to be answered for sure. Next, Minnesota and Houston. Minnesota's been one of the surprise teams of the year. Houston, as expected, has been good, although their offense hasn't been as firing as many would have thought they would. I mean, with the way they played last week, they didn't make any offensive mistakes for the most part, but, I mean, who would have thought with the way they were able to move the ball last week that they would have scored more points? I mean, only 19 points. Yes, the Bears defense is pretty good, but come on, should be able to. I mean, if CJ Stroud is him and he's supposed to be really good, shouldn't they be close to like 330 yards passing, like close to 100 on the ground? Yes, the rushing was definitely hindered last week with Joe Mixon going out with an injury, and hopefully for their sake he's able to return. Now, the Minnesota Vikings, their defense has been surprisingly solid for the most part, even despite losing a huge piece like Danielle Hunter in the middle. I expect Justin Jefferson to play, even though he got banged up and missed a quarter and a half last week. Had the surprise win over San Francisco. The running game has been pretty solid for the most part. Aaron Jones hasn't been great, but Ty Chandler has been able to get some runs here and there. And Sam Darnold's shown that, hey, yeah, he still has an arm. There's a reason why he was drafted third overall. He still has an arm. He's a great quarterback in the right situation, or he's a good quarterback in the right situation. Don't want to overinflate him because he's still not the best ever. But their offense this is going to be a real testing point for Minnesota. This is kind of the show me, are you really that good game? If Minnesota wins, you can show like, wow, maybe this team can actually steal a playoff spot. If they lose, you start to think, maybe they just didn't play against the best of teams. Yes, the 49ers are a good team, but they were really banged up. No Christian McCaffrey, or Debo got hurt towards the end of the game. But we'll see. I think Houston is going to be able to score plenty this week. I think it's going to be a relatively high-scoring game. Houston probably wins 35-30, something like that. I mean, that might be a really over-enthusiastic score, but I think Houston's really going to be able to score this week. I mean, Minnesota's defense has been solid, but still, I don't think they're that great. I think this is the week where Houston exposes the losses that they had last year. But I think Minnesota has a good shot to win, and if they win, like I said, could steal a playoff spot this year, and who knows, maybe the Packers or the Lions won't be one of those playoff teams in the NFC, but it remains to be seen. Right now I'm picking Houston, but if Minnesota wins, would not be shocked at all. Philly versus New Orleans. Philly has been pretty good this year for the most part, but they had a huge collapse on Monday night. I mean, that was such an unforced error. I mean, wow. Saquon Barkley dropped that ball so badly, and it was a good throw. I mean, Jalen Hurts has been pretty up and down this year. I mean, he's still Jalen Hurts, but he's still kind of skyballing or balls left and right. That final throw that he made on Monday night was just like, what are you, just punting down the field? I mean, that's what he basically did. He's just basically punted down the field with no shot to catch it. Sure, A.J. Brown is gone, but come on. If Jalen Hurts is really the quarterback that everybody thinks he's got to be better. And their defense has been one of the worst in the league so far, giving up chunks and chunks of yardage and a lot. Now, New Orleans has been one of the surprise teams of the year. Their offense has been clicking on all cylinders. Derek Carr is proving that maybe he is the quarterback we all thought he, although he is kind of fool's gold in a way, because every time it gets sucked into him being really good, he has a couple of boners and just not a lot of touchdowns, decent amount of yards, but just not making the plays. But I think the Saints have a real shot to go up, go to 3-0. It's going to be a pretty competitive game. Like, A.J. Brown's probably not going to play again. I think he's going to be out for the foreseeable future. I guess we'll see. Saquon Barkley has got to be better. I mean, last week, or this past Monday, he wasn't that great. And plus, with the drop ball, he's going to have to come out big and prove that, yes, last week was an aberration. I'm going to do better. I'm going to rush down the throat of the Saints, which their defense has been pretty solid and one of the better defenses in the league. But the offense, if the offense for the Saints can keep going, the Saints are going to win this game. They are, because I just think the Eagles defense hasn't been up to snuff. And so for that reason, the Saints in New Orleans are going to win 35-34. It's going to be a really close game. I know, 2 games in a row I picked a team to score 35 points, but I think the Saints can continue to score. I know, like I said, the shoe is going to fall and Derek Carr is going to have a really bad game, but I don't think it's going to be this game. Maybe against Tampa Bay and down the line, but it's not going to be this game. He's going to go off, and Kamara is still going to have a great game. And the Saints are going to be 3-0, and everybody's going to be like, wow, the Saints are 3-0. Who would have figured? Next. The Chargers versus Pittsburgh. The Chargers have been a surprising team so far, but they could run into a big brick wall that is the Steelers defense, because the Steelers defense has been fantastic. Their offense has been pretty putrid for the most part. Yes, Justin Fields has been winning games and not making mistakes, but the Steelers still only have one touchdown through 2 weeks. And yes, they played the Broncos and they played the Falcons. Like, come on, you gotta be able to score more. I know they don't have a lot of weapons, and Najee Harris is a good running back, and George Pickens is still George Pickens, but their offense has not been stellar. It's just their defense has been winning the game. TJ Watt is on a historic sack pace. Cameron Hayward is still Cameron Hayward for the most part. Alex Highsmith is still Alex Highsmith. They have weapons all over the field on the defense. Minka Fitzpatrick is still great. They have pieces everywhere. Their offensive line has been getting them yards and has been keeping Fields out of trouble for making really dumb decisions. But the Chargers look good right now. And J.K. Dobbins has been great, showing why people thought he had so much potential in year one. He's flashing signs of his rookie season. The only reason he hasn't gotten more is just because he has been able to stay healthy. But with those two big guys on the offensive line, Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt, that offensive line could push through the Pittsburgh defense this week. But her passing game hasn't been really there. Quentin No Hands Johnson didn't have 2 touchdowns last week, so maybe he's just fixing his dropping issue. Lad McConkey didn't do too much last week, but he had his moments. But in the end, I think Pittsburgh's defense is going to get to Justin Herbert this week. I think they're going to be able to slow down J.K. Dobbins for the most part. Maybe keep him under 100 yards, but maybe him get a touchdown or so. But I think it's going to be a relatively low-scoring game. Relatively. Something like, weird score, 17-14. Yeah, I think 17-14 is a reasonable score. But in the end, Pittsburgh will win and be 3-0. And who knows? Maybe at the end of this week, Baltimore could be 0-3 and Pittsburgh could be 3-0, and they haven't even played them. Now that would be something. That would be something that not a lot of people would expect, me included. I definitely wouldn't have expected Pittsburgh to be 3-0, but I'm calling it. I think they're going to be able to slow down LA, and it's going to be Jim Harbaugh's first loss as coach of the LA Chargers. Next, Denver versus Tampa Bay. Denver has not been good. Bo Nix is more like Bo Picks every week, am I right? Tampa Bay has been a really surprising team. Their defense has been solid. Baker Mayfield has been arguably the best quarterback in the league. He has 2 great wide receivers. Rashad White has had his moments this year, but last week was not it. He's going to have to get better this week. Offensive line has been pretty steady. Defense has been really sneaky, getting sacks. Not forcing too many turnovers. Well, actually, last week they forced a couple turnovers on Jared Goff. Jared Goff did Jared Goff things, and as well, they lost. Although Tampa Bay got outgained by 200 yards over from the Detroit Lions, they still managed to win. And now they're playing Denver. It's in Tampa Bay. I like I like Tampa Bay winning this game. Denver is just like, Bo Nix is the best quarterback out there, but he needs to do better. He just needs to do better. For as long as he's been playing, he needs to be better. I know they don't have a lot of pieces. Their offensive line is not really great. They don't have much of a running game, and they don't have a lot of weapons, but he's got to be better. At the very least, stop making boneheaded picks in the end zone. He's done that a couple of times already, and it's just not good. You need to see better from your 12th overall selection. He needs to be better than that. But unfortunately, I don't think it's going to get any better. I think Tampa Bay is going to be able to win. Mike Evans might be slowed down a little bit by Patrick Surtain, but who's going to be able to stop Chris Godwin? One of those two receivers is going to go off this week and have a really good big game. I'm not sure which one, but Tampa Bay is going to win 24-10. And I think even 10 is kind of generous for the Denver Broncos because they haven't shown any real ability to score other than a field goal here and there. But 24-10, Tampa Bay wins, and it's just not going to be a very competitive game. I really don't think it's going to be very competitive. Next, Carolina and Las Vegas. Las Vegas with a surprise win of the week over Baltimore, or overcoming a 10-point deficit late in the game, making Lamar Jackson look really terrible. Baltimore was really bad last week against Las Vegas. And Las Vegas, again, showing their defense is really looking good. Max Crosby is just a wrecker. Wherever he goes, that offensive line has been getting pushed. They've been causing turnovers, which is good to see. It's starting to look more and more like a defense that Al Davis will be proud of. Al Davis will kind of be proud of this defense. Let's be honest. They got players at every level. They look great, and they have a leader, Max Crosby, leading the charge. Their offense hasn't been great, but Brock Bowers showing he could be the tight end of the future. He could be a future number one pick in fantasy drafts for years to come. Not number one overall, but just a first round, second round tight end, which is really good. He could be the future Travis Kelce, like that kind of dependable, every day getting you at least 15 to 20 points and doing it with ease. He looks great. The running game has been fucking putrid. Absolutely putrid. Zamir White was supposed to really eat this year, but their offensive line hasn't been great. Sure, they've been missing guys on the offensive line, so that definitely doesn't help. Gardner Minshew has been solid, but not great. He will need to continue improving. I really don't see Aiden O'Connell starting at any point this year, barring an injury to Gardner Minshew. It seems like Gardner Minshew has won that battle fair and square. And Antonio Pierce is going to ride or die with Gardner Minshew for the rest of the year until maybe he gets injured or something, God forbid. But it's an interesting game. Well, not really. Carolina's terrible. Carolina's just awful. Sure, maybe a change at Andy Dalton will get better, but Andy Dalton hasn't started in an NFL game for a while, and boy, yeah. Let's be honest. Las Vegas' defense is going to be able to get to Andy Dalton, force him into turnovers, and Carolina's going to have a bad day. They're going to have a bad day, just like they had last week, just like they had week 1. Carolina is a bad team. I think they should just have stuck with Bryce Young. I know you don't want to completely ruin his future, but for as many games as he's played, he's on a worse trajectory than DeMarcus Russell, which is just a bad thing to say. I don't think Bryce Young is a terrible quarterback. He just got dropped into the worst situation possible that is amplifying all of his weaknesses and none of his strengths. He's just in a bad spot right now. He probably may never get another starting chance in the NFL. Hopefully he does, but Carolina's going to get beat down this week. The Raiders are going to win 27-10. And it's just not going to be a pretty game. 10 is probably generous for the Carolina Panthers, but yeah, it's not going to be good once again. Next. Next we have Miami versus Seattle. Now Tua's not going to play. He's already going on IR. So Tyler Huntley or Skylar Thompson will be the quarterback for Miami. So as a fantasy perspective, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane will still get plenty of carries. I think he'll still get plenty of run, but I think you definitely downgrade some of their weapons a little bit. I mean, neither of those quarterbacks are really great to look at. Seattle has been up and down this year. They definitely suffered from their lack of running game last week, but they still managed to win. Zach Charbonnet had a decent game, but clearly they need Kenny Walker back. But DK Metcalf came through and had a big game. Geno Smith has been fine for the most part this year, but still not great. Offensive line has been solid. Defensive line has been able to get some push here and there, but it's going to be kind of a toss-up. I think this game is a real toss-up. In the end, I think Seattle probably does win. They probably do have the advantage at home, but it's just, I don't know what you're going to get with Tyler Huntley or Skylar Thompson. I really don't. Both have shown, well, at least Tyler Huntley has shown that he has some moments in this league. I mean, he got a Pro Bowl selection, even though, let's be honest, Tyler Huntley never should have been selected to a Pro Bowl. It just shows how no one wanted to play in the Pro Bowl that year, because Tyler Huntley, while he had a decent little run at the end of that year, still not great. But it's going to be a toss-up of all toss-up. I think Seattle wins 17-14 in a relatively ugly game. The running, whoever is able to get their running game going should win the game. I'm not going to totally write off Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, but let's be honest. Not having Tua Tagovailoa as your quarterback and replacing with Skylar Thompson or Tyler Huntley is a downgrade for sure. But Seattle wins 17-14. And I don't know what Miami's future is like. I mean, who knows if Tua ever plays again for the foreseeable future. Since he's on IR, he'll miss the next 4 games. And hopefully he's able to come back. But questions need to be asked. Answers need to be happen. But we won't know about Tua until the next 4 weeks pass, if he's even able to come back. But Seattle wins in the meantime. Next we have Baltimore and Dallas. Dallas, after absolutely getting their asses whipped last week by the Saints. Baltimore getting humiliated in a loss to the Las Vegas Raiders. Both teams are going to look to start the run this week for sure. Both quarterbacks are going to look to have a huge bounce back games. I like CeeDee Lamb to have a really decent or a good game in this one. Derek Henry, hopefully they'll be able to get him going. Lamar Jackson needs to bounce back. Last week he was not good. He was very good. He needs to get his legs going because he's a decent passer, but come on. The reason why Lamar Jackson is as good as he is because of his legs. His legs allow him to move out of the pocket and get bombs down the field. That's how he's able to really succeed. And he's not a big pocket quarterback. He never has been. He probably never will be. When he's running the ball, the Ravens are successful. Yes, their offensive line is very young. Who would have thought losing the 3 big pieces from their offensive line from a year ago would make it harder for them to get any run going forward? Their tight ends haven't been great. Isaiah Likely had a really good game week 1, but fell back down to earth last week as expected. Mark Andrews has not been able to get any run whatsoever for the most part. And let's be honest, it's going to be an interesting game for sure. I don't think Baltimore goes 0-3, but I do think Dallas could have a big comeback this week. I think it's very feasible. Baltimore is 0-3, and their season could very well be over at this week. Like, this game is huge for Baltimore. They cannot start the season 0-3, especially after last year. They cannot go from the first seed in the AFC to 0-3 to start their season the following year. They cannot. They need to win this game. That's why I am going to go with Baltimore very tentatively, 27-24. Dak Prescott loses it on a late game interception, but CeeDee Lamb, I think, is going to have a big game. Dak Prescott should have a big game. Lamar Jackson should have a big game. There's not going to be a lot of defense in this one, other than maybe at the end of the game. Baltimore should win and come through, but boy, if they lose, alarm bells are ringing, and maybe, just maybe, questions be asked, should they move on from John Harbaugh? I know this is probably a bit hyperbolic, but at some point, the coach just needs to move on, and just a new feel needs to be had on a team. The head coach can only stay for so long before the message gets tired in. Maybe, just maybe, if Baltimore loses, it's that time. But next, San Francisco versus the Rams. I'm just going to say this right clear in here. I don't think the Rams win this game. I don't think there's really any shot to win. Not having Cooper Kupp, not having Puka Nacua. Yes, Matthew Stafford is still Matthew Stafford, but look at him last week. The Arizona Cardinals don't have the greatest defense in the world. They're improving. They're slowly improving and building on it. Like, Jonathan Gannon is a great defensive coordinator and a great defensive coach, and he's building that defensive up. But let's be honest. Would you all have thought that their offense would suffer so poorly without Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua? I mean, my God, it was dismal last week. Demarcus Robinson is a decent wide receiver to throw a deep ball to every once in a while, but as a number one wide receiver, yikes, I wouldn't want that. Cody Parkinson definitely has to step up as a tight end for sure without those two big weapons on the outside. We'll see what else they have. Kerwin Williams just hasn't been himself, obviously, because, I mean, offense just hasn't really been churning without their two biggest weapons. San Francisco hasn't been great this year. They definitely got beat around last week. Deebo Samuel's going to be out for the foreseeable future. Jordan Mason had a decent game following up week one, but still was nothing like he was like the running wild that he did in the first week. Brock Purdy still looks Brock Purdy. He still makes good plays, but he just hasn't been as efficient. Brandon Ayuk hasn't had the greatest start to the season. Who would have thought holding out for most of the training camp would make sure that one of your top weapons is not ready to go? But ultimately, the offensive line, the defense should be able to get to Matthew Stafford. I just think without the lack of their big weapons on the outside, it's going to be really hard for the Los Angeles Rams to move the ball against the San Francisco defense, which definitely isn't what it has been in the past, but still it has Fred Warner. It still had other pieces there for sure, but in the end, I think San Francisco wins pretty easily in this one. I think it's going to be, I know it's still a divisional matchup, so maybe the Rams will have enough of it, but in the end, 24-10. I'll give the Rams 10. Okay, I'll give the Rams 10, but those 10 points are going to be really hard to come by, and I think the 49ers are going to win pretty easily, and it's just not going to be a very good game, unfortunately. Rams are going to be 0-3, and I think for the foreseeable future, just think their season is over. I mean, I would have thought they had a really good shot to win the division this year, but starting out 0-3 with 2 divisional losses already, that's not good, and their season could be over if they lose. Just like the Baltimore Ravens, must-win game for the Rams, with just not as much as what the Baltimore has to bring to the table. Just don't think it's going to happen. Next, Detroit versus Arizona. Interesting game. Arizona came up with a huge offensive outing last week. The Kyler Murray connection to Marvin Harrison Jr. looked legit. After a terrible start, it looks like it's firing on all cylinders. Sure, they didn't have much to do in the second half because they were so far up. James Conner has been a really, really solid running back. Also being able to get out and catch passes. He's a great pass catching back. If you have him in fantasy, which I do, he's been really good for you for sure. Offensive line still not what it could be, but it's slowly getting there. Like I said, the defense is still getting there. Still has the ability to force turnovers every now and then. Jonathan Gannon is definitely building something there. It's just going to take a little more. It's going to take a couple more top picks to really get to where they need to be, but they're certainly showing promise. And they really whooped the Rams last week. And to be honest, the Lions looked great last week for the most part. Their offense was great. Aiden Hutchinson was wrecking shit left and right. Sure, Amon-Ra went down and looked like he was really howling at the end, but sources say he looks like he's probably going to be able to play. And he had a really good game last week. Jameson Williams didn't have as good as a game as he did in week 1, but their offense was still firing on all cylinders. They just lost because Jared Goff did Jared Goff things, and they had a couple drives stall out at the end, which allowed Tampa Bay to win. But by all accounts, the Lions had a good week. They just couldn't score. That's the problem. But that's the ultimate goal in the NFL. If you can't score, it doesn't matter how many yards you have. If you can't score, you're not going to win the game. And it showed last week. Now, I think the Lions have a bounce back game, but Arizona has a shot to win. For sure. It's in the desert. I think Arizona can win, but ultimately, I'm going to give the win to the Lions 30 to 24. I think the Cardinals are still going to be able to get there. I think Kyler Murray should be able to exploit the Lions a little bit and get Marvin Harrison Jr. in the open and get some touchdowns for sure. But I think the Lions just have a little bit too much for the Arizona Cardinals. But Arizona Cardinals could, I'm going to call it, I think the Cardinals could be the upset of the week and beat the Lions, and the Lions could be 1-2. I know that seems blasphemous, but if Amon-Ra St. Brown goes out, that's a big target for Jared Goff not to have, and the Lions could suffer as a result. But as long as that defense is turning out the way it has, as long as Aiden Hutchinson continues to eat offensive linemen for a lunch and spit them out, the Lions are going to win. But it's going to be really close. The Cardinals really do have a decent chance to win. But in the end, the Lions just have a little bit too much. But next, KC versus Atlanta. Interesting game again. KC winning despite losing Isaiah Pacheco for the next couple months. Broken fibula. That definitely sucks. Kareem Hunt was signed on to the practice squad. Since he knows the playbook, I expect him to eventually be the starting running back for the Chiefs. Carson Steele looked fine last week, but he's not starting material. Samaje Perine is a decent running back in spurts, but is more of a pass-catching back. Offensive line still good. Patrick Mahomes is still Patrick Mahomes. They still have Rashee Rice. Still have Travis Kelce when penalties are not happening. Defense is still solid for the most part, but they've been hampered a little bit by giving up a little bit too many points here and there. But I still think they're a good team. Atlanta looking pretty good, especially down the line. Kirk Cousins just dropping dimes at the end of that game. That game was over. If Saquon Barkley catches that ball, game is over. The Falcons have no chance to go back, but Kirk Cousins looked really good last week. Kyle Pitts kind of disappeared again. Drake London had a pretty good game. Bijan looks great. He looks great. He fell short of 100 yards again, and that was disappointing. But up into the third quarter, Bijan Robinson was churning yards left and right. He's still a great pass catching back. I think in the end, it is in Atlanta, but I've learned you just don't go against Chiefs in these types of games. You just don't. And on Sunday Night Football, I think Kansas City wins 24-21. In the end, I think KC still has a little bit too much. I think they'll lose something for sure with Pacheco, but it's hard to bet against the Chiefs. It's really hard. Even though Atlanta had that upset magic last week, I think they're going to come up a little bit short. But they're a good team, and I think they can legitimately make the playoffs. It's just they need to keep it going. Kirk Cousins needs to stop or not throwing interception. If Kirk Cousins doesn't throw an interception, that's when his teams win. But when he starts chucking the ball over the field, throwing picks, fumbling left and right, that's when they lose. But if he can keep the turnovers down, or Atlanta has a good chance to win. But in the end, I'll give it to Casey. Next, our first Monday night game, Jacksonville versus Buffalo. Jacksonville has not been good this year. Travis Etienne has been fumbling. He hasn't looked very good. Trevor Lawrence has had some moments, and he had a great moment last week to come back against the Giants, but the drive stalled out. Well, first drive at the end, he had a safety, so that sucks. And then he had another chance, but again, this drive stalled out. He had 2 chances last week to throw everything off and show that there is a future for Trevor Lawrence, but he's rapidly losing time. Yes, he's paid, but let's not make the name of your stadium Trevor Banks Stadium. I know it's just like a promotion thing, but that's a terrible look. And then for them to lose the way that they did against the Browns, absolutely heartbreaking. Their defense has been decent, but could definitely be better. Offensive line, not the greatest either. It was a low-scoring game last week, but the Browns really had the game in check for most of the way. I mean, there were chances, and Jacksonville did kind of a comeback in the end, but Cleveland still stood up because their defense is just so solid. Buffalo looked great last week. One of the surprise teams. Well, not exactly. I expected them to win the division. I really think they'll win the division once again. They just clearly look like the best team in the AFC East. Josh Allen is still Josh Allen, even though he didn't do the most Josh Allen things last week. He didn't have to. James Cook was running free. Their defense was running free, causing turnovers left and right. 3 interceptions against Tua. They look great. Their defense, despite losing so many pieces, still looks great because Sean McDermott is a good defensive coach, and that's why the Bills are as good as they are. It's not only because Josh Allen is Josh Allen, but Sean McDermott really is a good coach. And even though he makes mistakes in the playoff games, during the regular season, he's just one of the best coaches out there. It's hard to really find anything else. And that's why when Bills fans talk about, moving on for Sean McDermott, it's not great. It's really not. He's just, what else are you going to replace him with? Are you going to find many better coaches than Sean McDermott? No, not really. I mean, he's really top of the top. And Josh Allen is going to have a really good game this week. Even though he struggled at times against the Jacksonville Jaguars, I don't think it's this time. It's in Buffalo. The ball is going to be flying freely. I think Allen goes back to his touchdown throwing ways, having probably 4 or 5 touchdowns in this game. I think the Bills are going to win pretty easily for the most part, 35-17. Yeah, I think the Bills are going to eat this week. They're going to be 3-0, and they're going to be looking great to win the AFC East. And the Jacksonville 0-3, again, Jacksonville needs to win this game. I think there's only 11 teams in NFL history that have started out their season 0-3 and have made the playoffs. No, I think only maybe one has actually won the Super Bowl, and I think that was the 2007 Giants or the 2011 Giants, one of those two. It's unheard of for an 0-3 team in the NFL to come back and make a big impact in the playoffs. It just is. So Buffalo wins pretty bigly, and in the end, Trevor Lawrence again. Questions to be asked for sure. And in our last game of the week, Washington versus Cincinnati. Cincinnati hasn't been good. Has not been good. Their offense hasn't been anything but sure. Sure, it hurts that T. Higgins has been out, but Joe Burrow had a pretty good game last week, but they came up short. Once again, I think the play that you have to really look at is going for the extra point in the third quarter instead of going for 2 and then missing that extra point, and as a result allowed KC to keep it close and ultimately win with a game-winning field goal. Washington has been pretty, I guess Jaden Daniels hasn't had the best start, but he's had a better start than Caleb Williams. He scored touchdown, he scored rushing touchdown, he's had passing touchdown. He's looked much better than Caleb Williams, and the defense, while not great, that defensive line still has good big names on it, but they haven't been able to really stop too many people. They got eaten alive by the Giants last week, especially in the secondary. Malik Neighbors ate their secondary alive. I think this is going to be a really interesting game. I can't see Joe Burrow going 0-3. I can't. So in the end, I think Joe Burrow wins the duel between Jaden Daniels. I think Jaden Daniels is able to get some run here. Brian Robinson had a really good game last week, so hopefully he continue to get better and better. I think in the end, the Bengals win 21-17, something like that. It's going to be a relatively close game, but in the end, Cincinnati wins, and at least they avoid the 0-3 start. Because could you imagine Cincinnati and Baltimore, two of the consistent teams that possibly win the AFC North, both starting out 0-3, and then have the Steelers 3-0 with a huge lead in the division, and they haven't even played Cincinnati or Baltimore yet. Yeah, this is again, like the Ravens, like other teams that I've talked about, going 0-3 ends your season. It really does. It's really hard to come back from that, but Cincinnati wins and avoids that fate. And that's the week. I will be posting up or doing another video, of course, on the Packers preview against the Tennessee Titans, which should be an interesting game, but I think it's going to be a really good week. I don't think we're going to have as many upsets as we did last week, although I have given a few scenarios where upsets can happen. But in the end, I think the favorites are going to mostly win for the most part. It should be a relatively easier game to pick. But you know the NFL, it's or trying to ask to pick a perfect week in the NFL is like trying to cross an interstate in LA and not get hit by traffic. It's nearly impossible. I mean, it's just one of those things that's just hard to do. You would love to see it every week you go in, expect you have a new slate of games to pick. You're like, yeah, this is the week that I'm gonna go perfect. But then the Thursday game happens and you get it wrong and you're 0-1 for the week. So it's a really hard thing to do, but that's why we love the game. It's interesting. The NFL is still one of the most exciting games in the world, and we all love it. We all cherish it. Yes, it frustrates the hell out of us, but in the end, we are fans, and we love our teams, and we'll continue to root for them, regardless of how many times the NFL screws us over. Unless you're a Chiefs fan, then you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about getting screwed over at all. But let me know what you think. Have a great day. Go Pack Go, and as always, God bless.